The chatter at the bar cuts off mid-sentence. It happens every time. She steps across the threshold, and the atmosphere shifts, hardening into something dense and unyielding. No one turns to look directly, yet every gaze in the room drifts toward her periphery. She does not offer a nod. She does not scan the crowd for a familiar face. She simply moves toward the center of the space, her pace steady, her eyes fixed on a point just beyond the immediate wall. The silence she drags in with her is not awkward. It is heavy. It is absolute. People standing near the doorway shift their weight, unconsciously stepping back to create a wider berth. She reaches the counter and waits. Her stillness is not a performance. It is a refusal to participate in the casual, frantic energy of the room. She brings no noise, offers no smile, and asks for nothing. In that absence of effort, the room loses its rhythm. The air feels thinner. She has not spoken a single word, yet she has already consumed the entire room, forcing everyone else to wonder exactly who is in control of this silence. You have seen this exact posture before. Perhaps you have stood in a room just like this one, watching someone walk through it with that same deliberate, untouchable detachment. It is not an isolated incident. This is a recurring pattern in the geography of human interaction. Think back. There's always one figure who remains at the edge of your memory, someone who never quite gave you what you expected, yet refuses to fade. You have met her, or perhaps you have caught yourself mirroring her movements when the stakes of a situation feel too high. She is the shadow in every social circle, the one who occupies more space by saying less. She exists across every culture and every social dynamic, a consistent psychological archetype that leaves an indelible mark. When you stop to analyze why she lingers in your thoughts, you realize it is not about a specific conversation or a single event. It is about the way she refuses to be absorbed by the people around her. She is a constant, a fixed point that forces others to recalibrate their own behavior just to get a reaction that never comes. You are not just observing a person. You are observing a master of internal boundaries that most people spend a lifetime trying to build. The labels follow her like smoke. Cold, broken, distant. Those who cannot reach her often settle for these definitions because they provide a convenient exit from the discomfort of her presence. It is easier to dismiss her as lacking depth than to admit that her silence is a deliberate choice. You hear the murmurs in corners of the room. They call her unreachable, as if her lack of immediate warmth is a mechanical failure. But watch the faces of those who judge her. Their eyes do not wander. They remain locked on her, waiting for a crack in the veneer that never comes. This is the irony of the so-called broken woman. She is not fragmented. She is simply operating on a frequency that requires more focus than most are willing to provide. Her perceived coldness is not an absence of feeling, but a total refusal to distribute it cheaply. When someone is labeled as cold, it serves as a defense mechanism for the observer, a way to reclaim power after being denied the validation they crave. She does not defend herself against these projections. She lets them pile up, indifferent to the narrative others weave to explain her gravity. She remains the most unforgettable figure in the room because she refuses to be understood on anyone's terms but her own. Now, we arrive at the heart of the contradiction. It is a phenomenon that defies standard social economics. In any other interaction, value is calculated by contribution. We favor those who provide validation, those who mirror our excitement, those who fill the silence. Yet, she inverts this entire structure. She gives the least. She offers the bare minimum of her internal landscape. And yet, she occupies the most space in your mind. Why? Why does the person who remains the most guarded become the one you cannot stop analyzing? We are not looking for a simple answer. We are about to perform an autopsy on this influence. We need to look at the wiring of human obsession and the architecture of power that she commands. If you have ever found yourself lying awake, replaying a conversation with someone who gave you nothing, you have already felt the weight of this gravity. It is not an accident. It is a system. It is time to peel back the layers of this influence and understand exactly how she turns her absence into a permanent fixture in the consciousness of others. We are moving beyond the surface observations. We are looking at the mechanics of the mind. We must strip away the moral judgments. This is not about cruelty. Cruelty requires intent to harm, and she has no interest in harm. She is simply mastering the physics of emotional gravity. Think of it as a celestial pull. A planet does not decide to have gravity. It simply possesses a mass so dense that everything near it is forced into an orbit. She is that mass. When she enters a space, she does not reach out to others. She creates a field that pulls them in. It is an effortless phenomenon. People gravitate toward her because her presence creates a vacuum that demands to be filled. They sense that she is anchored to something deep within herself, a source of stability that they lack. They feel the pull of that stability and mistake it for an invitation. It is not. It is simply her nature. She remains centered, and because she does not move to accommodate them, they must move to accommodate her. This is the architecture of her influence. She exerts no effort to be remembered, yet the force of her internal reality ensures she cannot be ignored. The gravity is not a tactic. It is the result of her refusing to dilute herself for the sake of the environment. She is the anchor, and the rest of the world is merely drifting in her wake. Consider the difference between a mirror and a canvas. Most people move through social spaces as mirrors. They reflect what is given to them. If you show them anger, they become defensive. If you show them affection, they provide validation. They are constantly cycling the emotions of others. But she has abandoned the mirror. She has become the blank canvas. Because she refuses to reflect your needs or validate your expectations, she leaves a void in the interaction. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the human mind is no different. When she offers nothing of her own internal state to respond to, you are forced to provide the content yourself. You begin to project your own deepest desires, your own unresolved questions, and your own fantasies onto her silence. You are not seeing her. You are seeing the reflection of your own internal hunger. This is the shift. She stops being a participant in your emotional labor, and in doing so, she becomes a vessel for your own psyche. You think you are analyzing her, but you are actually mapping the contours of your own need. She stays still, she stays silent, and you do the work of building a narrative around her. This is not a social game. It is a psychological trap of your own making, fueled by the space she refuses to fill. What we have described is not merely a social quirk. It is a dangerous power. It is dangerous because it bypasses the conscious mind and speaks directly to the ego. When a woman masters this level of unavailability, she is not just hiding. She is constructing an architecture of influence that few can dismantle. To understand this power, we must stop viewing it as a defense mechanism and start seeing it as a strategic position. This is the dissection of her influence. She does not play by the standard rules of social engagement. Where others seek to build rapport through shared reaction, she builds it through structured distance. She controls the flow of information, the distribution of focus, and the degree of access others have to her inner world. This creates a hierarchy of value. By withholding her presence, she increases her scarcity. By refusing to participate in the common dance of emotional exchange, she forces the environment to adapt to her tempo. It is a cold, precise calibration of human interaction. She is the architect of her own mystery, and that mystery is the primary tool of her influence. We are moving beyond the surface of attraction into the structural reality of why she remains the most unforgettable figure in any room. In our current era, the world demands immediate, constant availability. We are tethered to devices, to notifications, and to the relentless expectation that we must be reachable at every moment. To be available is to be seen as healthy, cooperative, and engaged. Yet, she functions as a deliberate anomaly. She remains internally tethered to herself, anchored in a reality that does not require external validation to persist. This creates a profound, almost magnetic tension. Think of a wire pulled taut between 2 points. The tension is not in the wire itself, but in the distance maintained. By refusing to surrender her internal state to the collective, she creates a space that others feel a compulsive need to bridge. She is not running away. She is simply refusing to move toward the noise. This static quality acts as a gravity well. Because she does not project her energy outward to meet the world bends toward her to find out what she is hiding. This is the magnetic pull of the self-contained. It is an act of defiance against the expectation of transparency. She holds her own center, and in doing so, she forces everyone else to orbit her silence. That is the architecture of her influence. We must now confront the fundamental error in most social dynamics. Conventional wisdom suggests that to be valued, one must be generous with time, attention, and emotional labor. We are taught that giving creates connection. Yet, the reality of human desire operates in reverse. Attraction is rarely built on the abundance of what is freely given. It is constructed entirely upon what is strategically withheld. When an individual provides everything, they forfeit their scarcity. They become a resource that is already accounted for, a known variable in a predictable equation. The mind does not fixate on the known. It fixates on the elusive. By choosing to hold back, she creates a vacuum that the other person feels compelled to fill with their own projections. She does not offer a finished map. She offers a territory that remains partially uncharted. This is not a calculated game of spite, but a precise calibration of interest. Because she does not expend her energy to secure external approval, she retains the entirety of her influence. In the economy of attraction, the person who keeps the most back is the person who commands the highest psychological currency. She understands that value is not found in the act of revealing, but in the power of the hidden. Consider the trajectory of a connection that begins with intense curiosity. When someone is fully accessible, they offer up their entire narrative at once. They provide answers before questions are even asked. They fill every silence with explanation and every gap with reassurance. In this state of total transparency, the mystery evaporates instantly. The human mind is wired to explore the unknown, but once the topography of a person is entirely mapped and laid bare, the impulse to investigate ceases. Accessibility is the inverse of intrigue. When you are reachable at every hour, when your reactions are predictable, and when your inner life is broadcast as a constant stream, you cease to be a destination. You become a fixture. A fixture is useful, but it is rarely the subject of intense fixation. The moment a person becomes fully transparent, the psychological tension that fuels desire is released. There is no longer a shadow to chase. There is no longer an internal reality to decipher. By being everywhere at once, one effectively disappears from the psyche of the other. The intrigue is not lost through malice. It is lost through the exhaustion of the unknown. To be fully known is to be fully finished, and once the mind considers a task finished, it moves on to the next one without hesitation. If total transparency is the death of desire, then the deliberate maintenance of distance is its foundation. We often mistake this space for a lack of interest, but it is actually the most precise tool in the arsenal of influence. To maintain a deliberate distance is to control the aperture of one's own exposure. She does not close the door. She simply keeps it partially ajar. This creates a specific kind of psychological pressure. By denying others immediate access to her internal landscape, she forces them to grapple with the unknown. This is not about hiding who she is. It is about refusing to be consumed by the projections of others. When she keeps her distance, she forces the observer to slow down, to look closer, and to invest more cognitive energy into deciphering the silence. This distance functions as a structural barrier that keeps the other person in a state of active pursuit. They are not merely observing a static image, they are attempting to map a changing terrain. In this space, the mind begins to operate differently. It stops asking what it can take and starts wondering what else is hidden. This is the pivot point where mere curiosity transforms into a deeper, more persistent fixation. By refusing to be an open book, she ensures that the pages she chooses to reveal carry significantly more weight. To understand why she remains unforgettable, we must turn to a foundational concept in psychology known as the Zeigarnik effect. Named after the researcher Bluma Zeigarnik, this principle reveals a simple, inescapable truth about human cognition. The brain possesses a natural, unrelenting tendency to remember uncompleted tasks more vividly than finished ones. When a task is resolved, the mind archives it and moves on. When a task remains open, the brain keeps it at the forefront, cycling through the data in an attempt to find a conclusion. This is precisely the mechanism she triggers. By maintaining an emotionally incomplete state, she refuses to let the observer reach a resolution. Because the other person cannot fully categorize her or finalize their understanding of her inner world, their mind remains trapped in a state of active processing. She is the unfinished chapter, the lingering question, the puzzle that refuses to be solved. While others offer total closure, she provides only fragments. In doing so, she ensures her presence is not a static memory, but a persistent, recurring signal in the mind of the other. The human ego does not simply observe this gap. It attempts to bridge it, over and over again, reinforcing her position in their consciousness through the sheer labor of trying to reach an end that she will not provide. Because she remains an uncompleted narrative, the observer is locked in a relentless mental cycle. Every interaction is treated as a fresh attempt to find the missing piece, to reach the resolution that she purposefully withholds. They re-examine past conversations, searching for patterns that do not exist, hoping to find a key that was never meant to be handed over. This is not a passive memory. It is an active, recurring project. The mind treats her like a riddle that demands an answer, and with every failed attempt to categorize her, the obsession deepens. She does not need to speak to occupy their thoughts. Her silence acts as a catalyst for their own internal monologue. They populate the space she leaves empty with their own projections, their own insecurities, and their own desperate need for closure. By never offering that finality, she prevents the brain from archiving her. She stays present, sharp, and unavoidable. The ego cannot accept an unresolved outcome, so it returns to her again and again, trying to bridge the distance she maintains. She becomes the constant variable in their mental landscape, not because of what she does, but because of the resolution she refuses to grant. This is how she remains unforgettable. Consider the power of non-reactivity. Most social dynamics are built on a reciprocal exchange of emotional labor. If you provoke the average person, they provide a response. If you praise them, they bloom. They are mirrors, constantly reflecting the energy directed at them. She operates outside this mechanism. When she is presented with a demand for validation, she does not provide it. She creates a vacuum. In that silence, the other person begins to overanalyze their own input, questioning why their standard social currency has suddenly lost its purchasing power. She is not playing a game. She is simply refusing to participate in the labor that keeps the social machine running. This refusal creates an immediate, jarring shift in perceived value. Because she does not offer the expected emotional output, the observer stops seeing her as a peer and begins to view her as an entity to be deciphered. Her lack of reaction forces them to work harder, investing their own time and internal resources to extract a response that she does not owe them. By withholding this labor, she forces them to assign her a higher, more elusive value. She becomes expensive because she is no longer available for free. If this perspective resonates with you, it is because you are moving past the surface of these interactions. You are beginning to see the underlying architecture of influence, not just the symptoms. Most people navigate these dynamics blindly, reacting to every shift in the wind, but you are choosing to observe the mechanisms themselves. This channel is not for those who seek comfortable platitudes or simple social rules. It is a space for those who want to dissect psychology, feminine energy, and emotional intelligence with surgical precision. We are moving beyond the obvious. If you are on this journey, you are already separating yourself from the crowd that demands immediate accessibility. You are learning to distinguish between performative behavior and true strategic management of the self. This is a transition from being a participant in a chaotic social machine to becoming a student of its mechanics. If you find that this exploration is shifting your internal compass, consider subscribing. We are building a framework for those who want to see what most people never notice, and who are ready to apply that knowledge to their own lives. Leave a like if you are ready to continue this deeper investigation into the nature of power and the preservation of the self. To understand her influence, you must observe how she interacts with the frantic energy of the average social environment. Most people are defined by their reactions. They are kinetic, shifting, and constantly adjusting their posture to match the room. If you provoke them, they snap back. If you praise them, they bloom. They are perpetually tethered to the expectations of others. She remains a terrifyingly still point in the center of this chaos. While others scramble to fill the silence with noise or performative agreement, she offers nothing but her presence. This is not a passive act. It is a deliberate, structural choice. When someone enters her space, they immediately begin to scan for a reaction, looking for a sign of approval or a flicker of irritation. They find neither. By refusing to mirror the agitation of the people around her, she forces them to confront their own lack of center. She does not move to accommodate the room. She waits for the room to adjust to her. This stillness acts as a gravitational anchor. It is uncomfortable for those who rely on external validation, yet it is impossible to ignore. She does not compete for space. She simply occupies it, forcing everyone else to navigate around her ironclad composure. The silence she maintains is not merely an absence of sound. It is a vacuum. In a social world that relies on constant feedback loops, her refusal to provide a baseline response creates a profound psychological pressure. When she withholds the expected reaction, the person standing across from her is left without a compass. They begin to project their internal state onto the stillness she presents. They interpret her lack of response as a puzzle to be solved or a flaw to be corrected. In that void, the mind starts to hunt for meaning where none was intentionally placed. The observer begins to overanalyze every micro-movement and every word, dissecting their own previous statements to find the error that caused her withdrawal. They become trapped in a loop of self-correction. They question if they were too loud, too desperate, or perhaps too transparent. The vacuum sucks them into a spiral of doubt, forcing them to dedicate more mental energy to her than they would to someone who is actively engaging with them. She does not reach out to influence their thoughts. She simply exists, and their own need for clarity does the work for her. By remaining unreadable, she forces them to build their own narrative of her, one that inevitably centers on their own insecurity. The descent into fixation begins with a single, pointed question. What is wrong with me? The observer, unable to extract a reaction from her, turns their analytical blade inward. They review their recent social performance, scrubbing their memory for any perceived social transgression. They begin to measure their own worth against her silence. If she remains unbothered, they conclude that they have failed to provide something of value, or worse, that they are fundamentally insufficient. This is the pivot point. The silence is no longer an external condition. It becomes a mirror reflecting their own perceived inadequacy. They start to over-prepare for the next interaction, rehearsing lines and refining their posture, hoping to finally trigger a response that validates their existence. Every minute she remains unresponsive, their frantic need to bridge the gap intensifies. They track her gaze, they analyze the slight shift in her stance, and they interpret every non-event as a test they are currently failing. They are no longer interacting with her as an equal. They are performing for an audience of one, desperately attempting to earn a validation that she has no intention of giving. Their self-worth is now entirely tethered to the impossible task of breaking her resolve. The psychological fixation hardens into a singular, aggressive intent. The ego does not merely want to understand her anymore. It wants to conquer her. It views her emotional distance not as a boundary, but as a challenge to its own dominance. The human ego is wired to categorize, to label, and ultimately, to master its environment. When it encounters a person who refuses to be mapped, it interprets that refusal as an affront. The observer stops asking what they did wrong and starts asking how they can force a result. They view her silence as a fortress gate that must be breached. This is the ego trap. the more she remains unmoved, the more the ego insists that its value depends on breaking her resolve. It creates a perverse competition where the only prize is the dismantling of her independence. They obsess over the win. They calculate the next move, the next conversation, the next strategy to force a reaction. They are no longer seeking connection. They are seeking a victory. The silence is now an enemy to be defeated, and the ego will sacrifice its own peace of mind to ensure that it does not lose. She is no longer a person. She is the ultimate test of their power. Once the ego accepts that she is not a trophy to be won, it pivots to a more dangerous fixation. She is transformed into a vast, uncharted landscape. The observer stops attempting to force a reaction and begins the slow, methodical work of mapping her. They treat every casual word as a geographic coordinate. They analyze her pauses, her choice of words, and her sudden changes in direction as if they were terrain features on a complex, shifting map. They are no longer interested in the person. They are interested in the topography of her mind. They document her preferences, her triggers, and her silences, building a detailed atlas of her internal world. This process is all-consuming. They spend their hours cross-referencing her past actions against her current state, looking for patterns that do not exist. They are convinced that if they can just chart every valley and peak of her personality, they will finally understand the logic of her distance. They hunt for hidden pathways, believing that one specific route will lead them to the center of her focus. They are lost in the study of her, convinced that they are making progress, while they are merely circling a territory they will never fully occupy. It is a recursive loop of intellectual labor, where the act of mapping becomes more important than the destination itself. The mapping project fails. Every coordinate the observer painstakingly recorded is suddenly rendered obsolete as she pulls back. She retreats further into her own internal reality, locking doors that were never even left ajar. The landscape they thought they were charting begins to dissolve, leaving them clutching at empty air. This is not a gradual departure. It is an active, deliberate withdrawal. The observer notices the shift in the temperature of the room, the way she stops acknowledging the space they share, and the sudden, absolute silence she projects. The frantic need sets in. They scramble to re-establish the connection, throwing more emotional labor at the void, hoping to find a ledge to hold on to. They increase the frequency of their attempts, repeating questions, offering more of themselves, and creating unnecessary crises just to force her to engage. Each effort is met with the same impenetrable stillness. The gap widens, and the observer's desperation surges to fill it. They are no longer mapping a landscape. They are sprinting to catch a ghost. Their pulse quickens as the boundary between them thickens. Every step they take forward, she takes 2 steps back, leaving them breathless, isolated, and increasingly obsessed with the distance she has created. The chase shifts shape. The observer no longer cares about the target. They are tethered to the motion of the pursuit itself. This is the dance of shadows. They move in lockstep with her absences, matching her pace, mimicking her turns, and reacting to her silence with a choreographed precision. If she pivots, they pivot. If she pauses, they stumble into a halt. The person she is becomes irrelevant. She is merely the anchor for a movement that exists entirely in the observer's mind. They become addicted to the friction of the pursuit. The exhaustion of chasing is confused with the intimacy of connection. They measure their own worth by the intensity of the struggle, oblivious to the fact that she has long since stopped participating in the rhythm. She remains a shadow, a silhouette against the wall, while they perform a frantic, one-sided routine in the dark. They are chasing a projection, a flicker of light that moves only because they are running toward it. The harder they push, the more she recedes. Yet the momentum of their own effort keeps them trapped in the loop. It is a closed circuit. The pursuit is now the only reality. The person being pursued is merely the ghost that keeps the machinery of their obsession turning. The observer mistakes her silence for a flight response. They watch her withdraw and assume she is running because she is afraid of the weight of their attention. This is the common error. They interpret her distance as a broken mechanism, a defense against the vulnerability they are so eager to force upon her. But they are reading the wrong manual. Avoidance is a reaction to fear. It is a chaotic, involuntary retreat from intimacy. What she practices is something else entirely. It is a calculated, cold-blooded preservation of self. She does not run because she is overwhelmed. She stands still because she has not yet granted access. The door to her inner sanctuary remains locked, not because of a fragile lock, but because she holds the only key. She is not reacting to the observer's presence at all. She is managing her own sovereignty. When the observer finally realizes she is not afraid of them, but simply unimpressed by their demand for entry, the entire dynamic collapses. The hunter suddenly understands they are not pursuing a wounded animal, but a strategist who has been observing the hunt from a position of absolute, unassailable calm. The narrative of her being broken disintegrates, replaced by the uncomfortable truth of her autonomy. The confusion lies in the definition of emotional intelligence. Many believe it is the ability to display feelings, to share, to be transparent, to bleed when the moment calls for it. This is a misunderstanding of utility. True emotional intelligence is not the suppression of feelings. It is the strategic management of them. She does not lack the capacity for depth. She lacks the impulse to waste it. Think of her inner life as a high-security vault. The contents are real, they are dense, and they are powerful. But she manages the access with a cold, analytical precision. She evaluates the cost of every interaction. If the exchange does not serve her sovereignty, the door remains closed. She does not feel less. She chooses to feel in private. She monitors her reactions, strips them of their raw, reflexive urgency, and releases only what serves her objective. It is a calculated economy of self. She treats her internal reality as a limited resource, not a public utility. By refusing to flood the space with her presence, she forces others to operate in the vacuum she creates. She is the architect of her own boundary, and she controls the flow of information with the same detachment that a strategist monitors a battlefield. She is not hiding. She is curating. She is physically present, yet the space around her feels unoccupied by her internal reality. She offers her attention only in measured, deliberate increments. When others approach, they find no open gate, no invitation to enter the sanctuary she has constructed within herself. She stands at the threshold of her own consciousness, a sentry who does not sleep. The demands of others to be seen, to be validated, or to be included hit the barrier of her indifference and fall away. She does not argue. She does not explain. She simply holds the line. Every attempt to force a connection is met with a steady, unyielding silence that strips the urgency from the other person's request. She is forcing them to demonstrate their value, to prove they are capable of respecting the space they wish to occupy. The key to her sanctuary is not given. It is earned through a rigorous, often exhausting process of proving one's own sovereignty. She watches the struggle of those who demand entry and remains unmoved. They are not entitled to her depths. She remains the sole arbiter of who crosses the line, and until that standard is met, the door remains shut. It is a quiet, absolute exercise of power that leaves others standing in the cold, waiting for a sign that she is never obligated to provide. The distinction is fundamental. The avoidant person runs because they fear the weight of intimacy. They retreat to escape a threat. The woman of sovereignty does not run. She remains, but she remains entirely her own. She keeps the gates of her inner sanctuary locked not because she is afraid of what might enter, but because she refuses to allow any external force to dictate the terms of her existence. This is not a trauma-informed defense mechanism. It is a deliberate, calculated act of self-ownership. She views her essence as a territory, and she is the only authority governing its borders. When she withholds, she is not reacting to a lack of security. She is asserting the primacy of her own will. She strips away the need for external validation, effectively making her own approval the only currency that holds any value. By refusing to be consumed, She transcends the common cycle of reaction and counter-reaction. She is not protecting a broken part of herself. She is protecting the integrity of her whole. This is the apex of influence. To own oneself so completely that no external demand can compel a surrender is the highest form of power one can possess. It is the end of the chase and the beginning of absolute, unassailable autonomy. The final realization is a cold, sharp blade. It cuts through the habit of participation. Most people operate on the assumption that connection requires a constant outflow of energy. They pour their essence into others, hoping to be filled in return. But the woman who has mastered her own gravity understands a different truth. Power is not found in the volume of what you give away. It is found in the sheer, unyielding strength required to keep your essence for yourself. Every time you refrain from offering a piece of your identity to satisfy the hunger of another, you solidify your own foundation. You are not a vessel to be emptied. You are a reservoir. To keep your essence intact is to maintain the pressure that keeps you whole. When you stop leaking parts of yourself to earn approval, you stop being a participant in your own delusion. This is the hardest discipline. It requires the courage to sit in silence while others demand a performance. It requires the audacity to value your own internal landscape more than the external validation of the masses. You realize then that the strength to withhold is the ultimate act of self-love. It is the final barrier against being consumed. You are not a gift to be unwrapped. You are a reality to be guarded. Now, the mirror turns back toward you. You have spent your life navigating the architecture of influence, observing how others respond to your presence or lack thereof. But look closer at the intention behind your pursuit. When you reach out to bridge the distance, what is the precise nature of the hunger driving your hand? Are you truly seeking a connection, a mutual recognition between two sovereign entities, or are you seeking to be consumed? Consider the frequency with which you offer your own essence to others, hoping to be dissolved into their reality rather than standing firm in your own. Most people do not want a partner. They want a vessel. They want to pour their own chaos into someone else and call it intimacy. If you are constantly looking for someone to define you, to fill the gaps in your own identity, you are not seeking a bond. You are seeking a surrender. You are seeking a place where your own heavy, unresolved edges can finally be worn down by the friction of another person. It is a terrifying question to pose to oneself in the quiet, but it remains the only one that matters. Before you demand more from the world, ask why you are so eager to disappear into it. Not everyone will grasp what has been laid out here. For the vast majority, the concepts of self-sovereignty and strategic emotional management are entirely foreign. They move through the world, trapped in the endless loop of seeking approval, craving validation, and fearing the silence that follows when the applause fades. They look at the woman who holds her own center and see only a void, because they lack the depth to perceive the structure beneath. This is the divide. Most people are conditioned to fear the shadows of their own internal reality, so they run toward the light of others, hoping to be seen. You, however, are beginning to operate on a different frequency. You are learning to see the mechanics of influence, the way power is held by those who refuse to negotiate their worth. This level of awareness is a quiet, heavy burden, but it is also the key to a different life. It is not meant for the masses, and it certainly is not meant for those who prefer the comfort of being understood over the strength of being untouchable. You are starting to see the world as it actually functions, stripped of the polite illusions that keep others tethered to their own dissatisfaction. That realization is rare. It separates the observer from the observed. You have reached the edge of the standard narrative. Most who encounter these truths will turn back, retreating into the safety of their old, predictable patterns. They prefer the comfort of the shallow end, where the rules are simple and the stakes are low. But you have looked into the mechanisms of power and recognized them for what they are. This is not a destination. It is an orientation. If you intend to master the architecture of influence and navigate the complexities of human psychology with precision, you must go further. The study of self-sovereignty and the strategic management of desire is a lifelong pursuit, not a casual observation. We will continue to dissect the forces that shape attraction and the invisible lines that define true autonomy. If you are prepared to shed the illusions that govern the majority and seek the cold, clear clarity of this level of awareness, the path is open. Subscribe. There is much more to uncover beneath the surface. We will continue this descent, mapping the terrain that others are too afraid to even acknowledge. The next phase of this exploration begins here. Stay sharp, remain detached, and prepare to see exactly what lies behind the curtain.